Brother's Blood, a revenge story. The night smelled like gunpowder. Ethan Carter stood on the cracked sidewalk of a quiet Detroit street, his breath fogging in the cold air. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles burned white. Across the yellow police tape, his brother's body was being lifted into a van. The flashing red and blue lights painted Ethan's face in broken colors. His eyes were wide, glassy, yet burning with something deeper than grief. A detective mumbled questions, but Ethan barely heard him. All he could see was his brother's Daniel's sneaker poking out from the zipped black bag. His jaw locked. His lips trembled, not from the cold, but from rage crawling through every vein. Neighbors whispered. Some crossed themselves. Some shook their heads. But one man stood apart. A rival family's son, Mark Rivera, leaned against a black SUV, smirking. His arms were crossed, casual, arrogant, like he was watching a show. When his eyes met Ethan's, he lifted 2 fingers to his temple like a gun and mouthed the word, "Bang." Ethan's chest heaved, his vision blurred red. "Sir, you need to calm down," the officer warned, but Ethan's ears rang too loud to listen. His brother was gone, stolen in a feud that had been simmering for years. And Ethan Carter knew, in that moment, his life had changed. He wasn't just grieving. He was promising. Justice would come. By his hands. Before blood stained the street, the Carters were just another working-class family trying to live quietly in Detroit. Ethan Carter was 27, wiry and strong, with calloused hands from years of construction work. His younger brother, Daniel, was 24, a college student with a bright smile that could light up any room. Together, they balanced each other. Ethan was serious, shoulders always stiff with responsibility, while Daniel was lighter, always teasing, always trying to make Ethan laugh. At family dinners, their mother, Grace, would shake her head and laugh at their banter. "Daniel, stop bothering your brother," she'd scold, though her lips twitched with a smile. And Daniel would grin, throwing his arm around Ethan's shoulder. "He loves it, Mom. Look at that face. That's his happy face." Ethan would roll his eyes, jaw tight, but the corner of his lips always betrayed him with a small smile. Their father, Robert, had died years earlier, leaving Ethan as the man of the house. He worked long hours, picked up side jobs, and did everything to keep Daniel in school. He often said, "You're the brains, Dan. You'll make it out of this mess. I'll be fine swinging hammers, but you've got to be bigger than this city." Daniel listened, eyes soft, but he never let Ethan forget that he wasn't alone. He'd bring Ethan coffee late at night when he worked overtime, crack jokes when Ethan looked too serious, and hug him tight after every argument. They were brothers, but more than that, they were each other's world. But Detroit wasn't kind to families like theirs. Their neighborhood was split down invisible lines. On one side, the Carters and families like them, scraping by with honest work. On the other, the Rivera clan, a family with money, but money soaked in crime. Everyone knew they ran parts of the city, the bars, the shady auto shops, the small-time hustlers, and everyone knew not to cross them. Except Daniel. Daniel didn't like bullies. He never did. When a Rivera cousin tried to push kids off the basketball court at the community center, Daniel stepped in. "Pick on someone your own size," he'd said, chin high, eyes flashing. Ethan remembered the day clearly. His fists had clenched the same way they would on the night of Daniel's death. He dragged Daniel home,
anger in his voice. "Don't mess with them, Dan. They're not kids playing games. They'll come for you." But Daniel only smirked, that fearless grin stretching wide. "What's the point of living scared, Ethan? Dad raised us better. He raised us to stand up." Ethan had no answer. He admired his brother's courage, but fear twisted in his gut. He'd seen the Rivera men in action. He knew what they were capable of. Still, life went on. The brothers shared a small 2-bedroom house with their mother. On summer nights, they'd sit on the porch drinking cheap soda, laughing about old times. Daniel would tell stories about campus life, professors who bored him to death, friends who dragged him into parties he didn't want to attend. Ethan would share stories from the construction site, near misses, grumbling foremen, and once a coworker who dropped his lunch into wet cement. Daniel would laugh so hard tears rolled down his cheeks, clutching his stomach, while Ethan shook his head, smiling despite himself. In those moments, the world outside didn't exist. The feud, the Riveras, the hard life, it all faded. Grace often peeked through the window, watching her sons with soft eyes. Sometimes she'd whisper a prayer. "Lord, let them stay safe. Let them stay together." But shadows were always nearby. At the local grocery, Ethan noticed Rivera men leaning on their cars, watching. At a diner, one slid past their booth, smirking at Daniel. Little warnings, little sparks. Ethan felt the tension building like a storm waiting to break. One night as they walked home from the bus stop, Daniel leaned closer, voice low. "They don't scare me, Ethan. I won't let them own this city, not while I live here." Ethan stopped walking, grabbed his brother's arm, and looked him dead in the eye. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed. "Don't talk like that. Promise me, Dan. Promise me you'll stay away from them." Daniel hesitated, then nodded, lips pressed together, but his eyes still carried that fire. The last time Ethan saw his brother truly happy was the night Daniel brought home a letter of acceptance for a graduate program in Chicago. He waved it in the air, grinning wide, practically bouncing with excitement. "Ethan, I got it! Full scholarship!" Grace cried, pulling Daniel into her arms, kissing his hair. Ethan stood still, eyes wide, throat tight. Finally, he stepped forward, clapped Daniel on the shoulder and whispered, "I'm proud of you, little brother." His voice cracked, but he didn't care. Daniel's eyes softened. He hugged Ethan tight and whispered back, "Couldn't have done it without you." That night, they celebrated with takeout pizza. Daniel laughed so hard he nearly choked on his slice. Ethan kept stealing glances at him, memorizing his face, the way his eyes shone, the way his smile filled the room. If Ethan had known what was coming, he would have never let Daniel leave the house again. Because in Detroit, the Riveras weren't the type to forgive. And Daniel Carter had unknowingly signed his own death warrant the day he stood up to them. The night it happened started like any other. Ethan was home late, his boots heavy with cement dust, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. He dropped onto the couch, rubbing his forehead. Daniel had gone out earlier to play basketball at the community center. "Won't be long," he'd said with that easy grin. But as the hours dragged past 10, then 11, Ethan's chest began to tighten. He stood at the window, pacing, jaw tight, eyes flicking down the street every few minutes. Grace, sitting at the kitchen table, folded and unfolded the same dish towel in her hands. Finally, headlights washed over the living room. Daniel's voice floated through the night air, laughing, carefree. Ethan exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. But then came another sound, tires screeching, doors slamming. Ethan froze, his fists clenched. Grace stood, eyes wide, the towel dropping to the floor. Outside, shadows moved fast. "Dan!" Ethan shouted, racing out the door. He saw them. 4 men from the Rivera crew circling Daniel like wolves. Mark Rivera, the smirking son, stepped forward, his leather jacket shining under the streetlight. Daniel's face was tight but defiant. His fists were raised. "Back off, Mark. I don't want trouble." Mark chuckled, slow and cold. "Trouble already found you, Carter. You should have kept your mouth shut." One of the men shoved Daniel hard. He stumbled, but didn't fall. His eyes flicked to Ethan, who was sprinting down the porch steps. "Run!" Ethan shouted, voice cracking with panic. Daniel shook his head. His jaw locked. His chest rose and fell hard. Mark's smirk widened. Wrong answer. The flash of the gun was faster than a blink. Bang! Daniel's body jerked. His mouth opened in shock, then pain. He staggered back, clutching his chest. His knees buckled. "No!" Ethan roared, his throat tearing with the sound. His legs pumped harder, but the world slowed. He saw his brother's eyes widen, then dim. He saw blood blooming through his shirt. He saw his brother fall, face first into the pavement. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, hands shaking as they pressed uselessly against the wound. "Stay with me, Dan! Stay with me!" His voice was wild, desperate. Tears blurred his vision, falling onto his brother's pale skin. Daniel's lips trembled. He coughed, blood staining his teeth. His hand lifted weakly, gripping Ethan's sleeve. His eyes, those fire-filled eyes, softened into fear. Don't let them win," he whispered. Then his chest stilled. His hand slipped away. Ethan froze, his mouth open in a silent scream. His heart felt like it had been ripped out. He shook Daniel's shoulders, shouted his name, but there was no answer. Behind him, laughter cut through the night. Mark Rivera stood there, gun still smoking, smirk curling his lips. "Guess your brother wasn't as tough as he thought." Ethan's eyes snapped up, his face twisted into rage, tears streaking down his cheeks. His fists clenched so hard his nails cut into his palms. His jaw locked until it ached. "You bastard!" he roared, launching forward. But the Riveras moved fast. A fist crashed into Ethan's ribs, stealing his breath. Another man slammed him to the pavement, pinning his arms. Ethan thrashed, spit flying, eyes wild with fury. Mark crouched beside him, gun tapping against Ethan's cheek. "Careful, Carter. You're next if you don't learn your place." Ethan's teeth bared, his chest heaved. He growled, voice low, deadly. "I'll kill you. I swear on his blood. I'll kill you all." Mark only smirked wider, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. He patted Ethan's face mockingly, then stood. "We'll see about that." The men walked away, laughing, their shadows stretching long under the streetlight. Ethan dragged himself up, gasping, his whole body shaking. He stumbled back to Daniel, cradling his lifeless body in his arms. His forehead pressed against his brother's. His tears fell onto Daniel's face, mixing with the blood. Grace's screams split the night as she rushed from the porch, her hands clutching her hair, her knees buckling when she saw her youngest son limp in Ethan's arms. Ethan looked up at her, eyes hollow, voice breaking. "They killed him, Mom. They killed him." Grace collapsed beside them, her cries raw, echoing through the street. Neighbors gathered, whispering, some weeping, but no one dared step forward. The Riveras ruled this block with fear, and fear sealed their lips. Police arrived late, sirens wailing, lights flashing, but the Riveras were gone, leaving only the echo of gunfire and the stench of power.
A detective asked questions, but Ethan's answers came through clenched teeth, his voice sharp with fury. Mark Rivera. It was him. He killed my brother. The detective's eyes flickered, uneasy. He scribbled in his notebook, but said nothing. Ethan saw it, the hesitation, the fear. The Riveras had their hooks deep in the city. Justice wouldn't come from the law. Ethan knew it in his bones. That night, after the body was taken, after his mother was sedated by neighbors, Ethan sat alone on the porch. His hands shook, stained with his brother's blood. His eyes were empty, staring at the dark street. But inside, beneath the grief, a fire burned. His jaw locked, his chest rose and fell hard. His fists clenched again, nails cutting skin. Daniel's last words echoed in his head. "Don't let them win." Ethan whispered into the night, voice hoarse, raw, but steady. "I won't, Dan. I swear it. I'll make them pay."
The days after Daniel's death were a blur of pain. Ethan barely remembered the funeral. He remembered the weight of the casket, the cold earth swallowing his brother, and the sound of his mother's sobs breaking through the prayers. He remembered his own hands shaking so hard he could barely lower the flowers onto the coffin. But mostly, he remembered the emptiness. The house felt silent, hollow. Daniel's sneakers still sat by the door. His basketball leaned against the wall. His laughter, once echoing through the rooms, had been replaced by a suffocating quiet. Grace moved through the house like a ghost. She didn't cook, didn't talk, barely slept. Ethan would find her sitting in Daniel's room at night, clutching his pillow, her shoulders shaking with silent cries. Ethan tried to stay strong, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again. Daniel's wide, terrified eyes. The blood. Mark Rivera's smirk, the laughter as they walked away. Rage burned in him. But rage didn't pay bills, and bills were piling up fast. Without Daniel helping out, the construction job barely covered rent and food. Some days Ethan skipped meals so Grace could eat. He'd lie to her saying he wasn't hungry while his stomach twisted in knots. One morning, Ethan dragged himself to work only to be told the company had downsized. They let him go without a second thought. He stood outside the site, his hard hat dangling from his hand, his jaw clenched. His chest rose and fell hard, and for a moment he thought he might break down right there on the street. But no tears came. His grief had hardened into something colder. Still, no job meant no money. Soon the landlord was knocking at their door, demanding rent. Ethan promised to pay, his fists tightening at his sides, but the man only shook his head. "I'm not running a charity, Carter." Within weeks, they were evicted. Ethan and Grace moved into a small, run-down apartment on the edge of town. The ceiling leaked when it rained, the heat barely worked, and rats scratched in the walls at night. Grace cried when she saw it, her hands covering her face. Ethan just stared, jaw locked, feeling like he had failed her and Daniel both. Meanwhile, the Riveras lived like kings. Every time Ethan walked past their street, I saw their new cars parked outside, chrome gleaming under the sun. Music boomed from their parties, laughter spilling into the night. Mark Rivera strutted down the block with gold chains around his neck, surrounded by friends, flashing that same smug grin. And every time I saw him, my chest tightened, my fists clenched, and my jaw ached from grinding my teeth. The police did nothing. Weeks passed, then months. No arrests, no charges. The Riveras were untouchable. One night Ethan finally broke. He stormed into the station, slamming his fists on the counter. "You know who killed my brother! Why aren't you doing anything?" His voice cracked with fury, his face flushed, eyes wild. The officer behind the desk looked up, bored, chewing gum. "Calm down, son." Calm down? His hands shook, veins bulging in his neck. "Mark Rivera shot Daniel in cold blood, in front of me, and you're telling me to calm down?" The officer leaned closer, his voice low, sharp. "You got witnesses?" He froze. His chest heaved. His fists trembled. "You were there that night. Half the block saw." The officer sighed. "And how many of them will actually testify, huh? Everyone knows what happens when you cross the Riveras." His face twisted in rage. He slammed the counter so hard the officer flinched. "Then what's the point of you?" Before things got worse, another cop grabbed Ethan's arm and shoved him out the door. He stumbled into the night, breathing hard, his face pale with fury. As he stood there, fists clenched, he saw Mark Rivera across the street, leaning against a car, smoking. Their eyes locked. Mark smirked, flicked the cigarette to the ground, and walked away without a word. My chest burned. My teeth ground so hard I thought they might crack. I wanted to run across that street and tear him apart with my bare hands. But I couldn't. Not yet. The weeks dragged on, heavy with hunger, grief, and anger. Ethan picked up odd jobs, unloading trucks, cleaning lots, whatever paid cash. His body grew leaner, harder, his hands rougher, his eyes colder. But every dollar felt like dust compared to the weight of his brother's blood. One night Ethan came home late to find Grace sitting at the table, her face pale, her hands trembling. I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Ethan dropped his jacket, rushing to her. "Mom, no! Don't talk like that!" Her eyes filled with tears. "He's gone, Ethan. My baby's gone. And the men who did it, they're still out there, laughing." She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing. "What kind of world is this?" Ethan's chest heaved, his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He kneeled beside her, gripping her shoulders, his voice sharp, trembling. "I'll make it right, Mom. I swear to you. I don't care how long it takes. They'll pay." She looked at him through her tears, searching his face. For the first time, she saw something different in his eyes, something harder, darker. She shivered, pulling his hand to her chest. "Don't lose yourself, Ethan. Promise me." He didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he knew the truth. To destroy the Riveras, he would have to become someone else, someone ruthless. And he was ready.
Ethan's darkest days became his turning point. For weeks, he moved like a machine, working odd jobs by day, barely eating, and lying awake at night with his fists clenched, staring at the cracked ceiling. His body thinned, his face sharpened, his eyes hollowed. But behind the hollow look was a fire that wouldn't die. One evening, after a long day unloading crates at the docks,
He caught his reflection in a dirty window. His shirt clung to his chest, his arms stronger from the labor, his jaw set tight. For the first time, he didn't see a broken man. He saw a fighter. That night, he whispered into the dark, "You didn't kill me with him, Mark. You made me stronger." From then on, Ethan lived with purpose. He started running before dawn, pounding the pavement until his lungs burned and sweat drenched his shirt. His legs grew powerful, his breathing sharper. After work, he lifted whatever weights he could find, cinder blocks, scrap metal, anything heavy. His hands blistered, bled, healed, and hardened. Neighbors began to notice the change. He walked straighter, his shoulders squared, his eyes burning with focus. But it wasn't just his body. Ethan knew fists alone wouldn't bring the Riveras down. He needed to be smarter, stronger in every way. So he found his way into the local library. It smelled of old paper and dust, quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. At first, he sat awkwardly, flipping through books without knowing what to look for. But then he began reading about law, business, and strategy. He studied the way the world worked, how money and power could break a man faster than fists. Late nights, he scribbled notes, his brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. He practiced speaking in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, sharpening his tone, making his words strong, clear, and commanding. The man who once stumbled through grief now stood tall, his voice steady, his gaze firm. One night, as Grace watched from the kitchen door, she noticed the shift. Ethan's face glowed faintly under the flickering bulb as he read, lips moving silently with each line. His jaw was sharp, his posture straight. He wasn't her broken son anymore. He was becoming something else. Still, she worried. She saw the tightness in his jaw whenever the Rivera's name was mentioned. She saw the fire in his eyes when he passed their cars on the street. She knew revenge lived in his chest like a storm waiting to break, and she feared what it might turn him into. But Ethan wasn't rushing. Not anymore. He understood patience now. Every day was a step. Every bruise, every blister, every late night was another brick in the foundation he was building. Then came the opportunity. At the docks, where he unloaded crates, Ethan noticed how shipments came in and out, how some workers slipped envelopes to supervisors, how the Riveras had their hands in certain shipments, unmarked boxes that disappeared fast. Ethan's eyes narrowed. His mind clicked. This is how they stay rich. This is their lifeline. He started keeping notes, times, names, license plates. His handwriting was tight, precise, his hands steady, even when his heart raced. He knew this was dangerous. If they caught him snooping, he'd end up like Daniel, but he couldn't stop. Night after night, Ethan pieced together their business like a puzzle. Smuggling, drugs, bribes. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. He also began networking, slowly, carefully. At a local gym, he sparred with men tougher than him, learning how to fight with precision. His nose bled, his ribs bruised, but he never quit. Sweat dripped from his chin as he stood back up again and again, eyes locked, refusing to back down. "You got fire in you, kid," one trainer muttered, shaking his head. "Don't waste it." Ethan only nodded, jaw set.
I won't. Through the gym, he met others who had been burned by the Riveras, small business owners bullied into paying protection money, fathers who lost sons to drugs, mothers who cried in silence. Ethan listened, his fists clenched, his eyes burning. He wasn't alone. And slowly he built something the Riveras didn't expect. A circle of people who believed in him, men who wanted change, women who wanted safety, people who wanted justice. But Ethan wasn't reckless. He knew charging in with fists swinging would only get him killed. He needed to hit them where it hurt most: their money, their reputation, their power. So he crafted a plan. At night, sitting at the kitchen table, Ethan spread out his notes. His hands traced maps, schedules, routes. His lips pressed into a thin line as he whispered the steps to himself, each one precise. Cut off their shipments, expose their deals, take back what's ours. Grace watched quietly from the doorway, her hands wringing. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Ethan, don't lose yourself to hate." He looked up at her, eyes tired but steady. His jaw softened, just for a moment. "I'm not doing this just for me, Mom. I'm doing this for Daniel, for you, for everyone they've hurt." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "Then make sure you win." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "I will." From that night on, Ethan became a shadow in the city, watching, waiting, gathering proof. His fists were strong, his body hardened, but his greatest weapon now was his mind. He wasn't just chasing revenge, he was building something bigger, something that would outlast the Rivera's fear, something Daniel would have been proud of.
The night the plan came together, the city felt alive with tension. Ethan stood on a rooftop near the docks, the cold wind whipping through his jacket. Below, trucks rumbled in and out, headlights cutting through the fog. Men shouted, loading crates under the flicker of floodlights. Ethan's jaw clenched as he watched, his fists tightened in his gloves. He wasn't alone. 2 men from the gym, fathers who had lost sons to Rivera drugs, crouched beside him. Their faces were grim, eyes burning with the same fire. "You sure about this?" one asked, his voice low. Ethan nodded. His gaze never left the docks. "They've stolen enough. Tonight we take it back." The man exhaled, shoulders tight. "Then let's end it." At Ethan's signal, the group moved like shadows. Cameras hidden weeks earlier were already recording. Phones buzzed quietly as evidence uploaded in real time to cloud accounts and trusted allies. Every bribe, every illegal shipment, every dirty cop on the take, all of it captured. Down at the docks, Rivera men joked and smoked, unaware that the empire they'd built was crumbling under their feet. Then it started. One of Ethan's allies cut the lights. The city fell into chaos. Shouts echoed, flashlights flickered. Ethan and his team slipped in through the dark, their footsteps quick and silent. "Move the truck!" someone yelled. Ethan stepped into the glow of a single overhead bulb. His shoulders were squared, his jaw locked, his eyes sharp as blades. For the first time in months, he felt no fear. Mark Rivera turned, cigarette dangling from his lips. His smirk faltered when he saw Ethan standing there. "Well, well," he drawled, tossing the cigarette aside. "The grieving brother shows up to die." Ethan's lips curled into a grim smile, his fists tightened. Not tonight. The fight erupted. Rivera men charged, fists swinging, chains clinking. Ethan moved like a storm. His body, hardened by months of labor and training, struck with precision. He blocked, countered, slammed one man into a crate. His fist cracked against another's jaw, sending him sprawling. But Ethan wasn't just fighting. Every second, the cameras hidden above captured the chaos. Illegal weapons, drugs spilling from crates, Rivera soldiers brawling like animals. Proof, evidence, their empire exposed. Mark barked orders, firing a gun into the air. The sound split the night. "Take him down!" But Ethan kept coming. His chest heaved, sweat dripping, blood streaking his lip, but his eyes blazed. Every punch carried Daniel's memory. Every strike echoed with his brother's last words, "Don't let them win." Finally, it was just Ethan and Mark. They circled each other under the harsh dock lights, both breathing heavy, fists clenched. Mark sneered, his teeth flashing. "You think you can beat me, Carter? You're nothing. Always were. Your brother learned that the hard way." Ethan's jaw locked so tight it hurt. His fists trembled with rage. "Daniel was twice the man you'll ever be, and tonight I finish what you started." Mark roared and charged, swinging the gun like a club. Ethan ducked, the weapon grazing his shoulder. Pain shot through him, but he ignored it. His fist shot up, smashing into Mark's jaw. Mark staggered, snarling, blood on his lip. He swung again, wild. Ethan blocked, twisted his arm and slammed him against a crate. The gun clattered to the ground. Mark's eyes widened. His smirk was gone now, replaced by fear. "Wait." Ethan's face was hard, eyes blazing. His voice was sharp, heavy. No more waiting. He struck, a punch, then another. His fists landed like hammers, fueled by grief, rage, and love for the brother stolen from him. Mark collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his face. Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed against the fog. The cops were coming. But this time, they weren't here to protect the Riveras. Ethan's evidence was already in the hands of journalists, lawyers, and community leaders. The empire had fallen before the first squad car even arrived. Mark Rivera looked up, bruised and broken, his chest heaving. You'll never win." Ethan stood over him, chest rising and falling, his fist still trembling, his jaw clenched, his voice low, steady. "I already did." Police swarmed in, weapons drawn. Rivera men were slammed to the ground, handcuffed and dragged away shouting. Reporters appeared minutes later, cameras flashing. The world was finally watching. Mark Rivera was hauled up, bloodied and beaten, shoved into the back of a squad car. His eyes, once so smug, were hollow now. Ethan stood in the center of the chaos, sweat dripping, chest heaving. For the first time since Daniel's death, he allowed himself to breathe. His fists slowly unclenched, his shoulders lowered, his eyes softened just a little. He had done it. The Riveras were finished, and Daniel's last words, "Don't let them win," echoed in his mind like a victory song.
The city looked different the morning after. For the first time in years, the Rivera's street was quiet. No loud music, no cars screeching down the block, no mocking laughter cutting through the night. Their house, once buzzing with parties and power, sat silent, windows dark. News trucks lined the curb, cameras flashed as reporters told the story. Breaking, Rivera family crime empire exposed. Multiple arrests made. Charges include trafficking, extortion, and murder. Their empire had crumbled in a single night. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, his shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on the flashing lights. His face was bruised, his lips split, but there was a calmness in his expression that hadn't been there in months. His chest rose and fell slowly, like a man learning to breathe again. Grace stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm. Tears glistened in her eyes, but this time they weren't from grief alone. They were tears of release, of seeing the men who stole her son's life finally dragged down in chains. "They'll never hurt anyone again," Ethan said softly, his jaw tightening. Grace looked up at him, her lips trembling into the faintest smile. "You did it, Ethan. You kept your promise." He nodded, but his eyes flicked to the ground, heavy with the weight of what it cost. Daniel wasn't there to see it. No victory, no justice could bring back his laugh, his grin, the way he used to nudge Ethan's shoulder after a long day. That ache would never leave. But still, Ethan had honored him. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. With the Riveras gone, people walked the streets without fear. Shops reopened. Kids played outside again, their laughter echoing through the block where gunshots once rang. Ethan worked with community leaders to rebuild. He used the knowledge he had gained in the library, the discipline he had forged through sweat and struggle. He spoke at meetings, his voice steady, his eyes fierce. He told Daniel's story, not just of his death, but of his life, his dreams, his fire. People listened. Soon, Ethan wasn't just the grieving brother anymore. He became a leader, a voice against corruption, proof that even the strongest empire of fear could fall. But at night, when the meetings ended and the streets grew quiet, he would sit on the porch with his mother, staring at the stars. Grace would sip her tea, her hands steadier now. Ethan would lean back, his jaw unclenched, his fists relaxed for once. And sometimes, when the wind was soft, he swore he could hear Daniel's voice, faint, like an echo carried through the night. "Don't let them win." A small smile would tug at Ethan's lips, not a smile of joy, but of peace. One evening, weeks later, a young boy from the neighborhood came up to him. His shoes were scuffed, his voice nervous. "Mr. Carter," the boy said, fiddling with his hands, "is it true? You took down the Riveras?" Ethan looked down at him, his eyes softening. He knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I didn't do it alone. The whole neighborhood stood up. That's how we win." The boy's eyes lit up, wide with admiration. Ethan saw Daniel in that look, that same fire, that same hunger for something better. His throat tightened, but his smile held. From that moment, Ethan knew. Daniel's fight didn't end in that street. It lived on in every person who refused to bow to fear, in every child who dared to dream of a safer tomorrow. The Riveras were gone, their wealth, their power, their fear stripped away. And Ethan? He had risen from the ashes of his grief. His success was his revenge, not just survival, not just payback, but transformation. Because true revenge wasn't about matching their cruelty. It was about building something stronger in its place. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and crimson, Ethan sat on the porch steps, his hands folded, his eyes calm. Grace stepped out, her hair loose, her face softer than it had been in months. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. "What?" "Peace." For a long moment he said nothing. His jaw worked, his chest rose and fell. Then finally he nodded. A small, tired,
but genuine smile curved his lips. "Yeah," he said softly. "I do." They sat together as the sky darkened, the first stars twinkling above. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing deep. For the first time since Daniel's death, the air didn't taste like grief or rage. It tasted like freedom. And as he opened his eyes, staring into the night, he whispered one last vow, not heavy with anger this time, but steady with resolve. "I won't let them win, Dan. Not ever."